Hey everyone, this is another installment of a little series that I've been making for keyboard players and fans of the Blade Runner soundtrack. So this is mostly to try to share some things with keyboard players so it gets a little bit detailed perhaps for some of the rest of you. But I want to talk about the new cover that I did for Tears and Rain. The first one of these videos I did was after doing Blade Runner end titles and talked about those sounds. And then the second one was after I covered Rachel's song with my daughter just before she moved to South Korea, which is where she still is. And my most recent one, Tears and Rain, has some different sounds in it and wanted to talk about those a little bit for those of you that might find that interesting or useful. So, of course, I want to talk about some of these Blade Runner brass sounds that I'm getting out of the Hydrasynth now. Wasn't able to get those for quite a while, spent a lot of time working on them, and eventually I've come to really love the keyboard and those sounds. Those are kinds of sounds that I really was hoping to get when I bought this instrument, and it took a long time. I've watched probably all of those YouTube demos where people are talking about how to make the sound. There's a whole mess of them, a lot of people demonstrating the sound, and they're all a little different. And I had probably 15 different patches in here at one point I was working on, trying to modulate things. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the details of that toward the end of the video because it might be the most boring part for the rest of you. But I want to talk about these string sounds. The string sounds are coming from 3 analog sources. Now, some of you will say, gosh, that sounds indulgent. And it is. It's expensive to get that kind of a sound live. But some of you will say, no, that sounds lush. That sounds really great. These string sounds are... I could play that stuff all day. Love that sound. That sound starts with the same kinds of sounds that I talked about in the earlier videos, which if you watch those, if you haven't watched those, maybe watch those first, and certainly watch the Tears and Rain video first. But I've described how I make those sounds on 2 different Prophet Rev 2 units. The module is up above here, and I'm kind of playing one on one side and one on the other side. They're MIDI together. And in this case, slower attack, and I added some low frequency and some LFO to get some vibrato, low frequency oscillation. So the vocoder plus 330 that Vangelis used a lot of, I was trying to get a sound like that over here. Pretty lush. When I get up higher, it doesn't sound as much like the string machine, and when you get down really low, it doesn't sound quite as much like the string machine, but there's just some... So after I got this this Behringer VC340, I wanted to try to blend the two together, and I've been using MIDI cables since the mid-'80s, so I thought, well, I just got to get out a MIDI cable, and then after a while my eyes were like crossing. I was like, I don't know how to do this. So to get the Behringer to control both Prophet Rev 2s, I bought a little MIDI merger box, and fortunately it was only about $20 some, and you run the 2 cables in, 2 cables out, and that allows me to play all those sounds from one keyboard, which is what I was going for. So if I turn this down and turn this to a warmer sound, and then start to blend this up, you can blend the two together. Now, those of you that are very into Blade Runner, when you think of strings in Blade Runner, you do think of that Roland 330 vocoder string machine. Did you know that there was another string machine in the studio at Nemo at that time? I was corresponding with Paul Whiffen, who was is a really successful programmer. He's worked with some of my main heroes, Keith Emerson and Vangelis, two in particular, and he was at Nemo during the recording of Blade Runner, although he was there more like when Vangelis wasn't recording. He was programming sounds on the CS80. In fact, he describes in some of his talks that he's been doing over in England, making that very first synthesizer sound that you hear at the very beginning of the film. That high string sound was one of his. And anyway, he mentioned that there was an Elka Rhapsody string machine, which is one that you don't think of as much anymore, but there was one of those at Nemo at the time. So how Vangelis recorded strings is something I'm curious about, if anybody has any real insights. To me, it sounds like there's a lot of layering and a lot of reverb and some other effects perhaps, and maybe a blending of different machines. So he had the Prophet 5, Prophet 10, and of course you can get some nice strings out of a CS80 as well. At the very beginning of Tears of Rain, we hear a lower, warmer sound, which to me sounds like the Prophet, but again, I'm not sure. So I play that on the Prophet at the beginning. Warmer sound. And then later on, it does sound more like the vocoder plus, or again, the Rhapsody, an Elka Rhapsody in the vid. I've never played one of those, but in the videos I've seen it, it seems to sound a lot like the 330. You can't dial these down to be that warm. So like the warmest this goes, if I turn off the Prophets, just play this. This is as warm as it gets. Now, of course, you could have used an external EQ to dial out some of the highs, but yeah, so lots of fun with getting these sounds. I want to talk a little bit about my maybe reluctant decision to buy some Behringer equipment as well today. I have this Behringer Model D over here, and some of you will say, why don't you just buy a MiniMoog? Well, they're selling for like $5,000 now. I did have a MiniMoog at one time. When I was 16, I bought a MiniMoog for $50. It was a real beat up one, and it was a guy who wanted to buy a DX7, and so he was selling off these old keyboards that he had, and he was in a good mood, and so for $50 I bought a MiniMoog, and I had that. It was my pride and joy, and at one summer day I had it at the top of a A-frame, universal support A-frame, and a friend and I were kind of moving it carefully, and that top shelf flipped. MiniMoog came crashing down and never worked right again. And in those days before the internet, I couldn't find anyone to fix it, so I eventually sold it, unfortunately. And I always thought I'd get another one, and the prices would come down. They just keep going up, and so now it seems crazy the prices they're getting for something that's a rather simple but wonderful instrument. I kept thinking that Moog would release something like this, a little MiniMoog in a box that I could MIDI into other things. I never liked that the keyboard was rather short. You know, kind of wanted to have a larger keyboard. Wanted something like this, and I didn't get one of these for the longest time because, you know, Behringer has this reputation of taking other people's designs and copying them. And of course, that's what these two instruments are. They're copying them. But if I were to buy a vocoder and a MiniMoog, you know, that'd be like $10,000, and it probably would sound in a recording very, very similar, very much the same. So I kind of eventually decided to go ahead and buy some. Not sure if I'd keep them or not, but I do like them. They're both analog. They're cheaper than my other instruments. Like the keyboard doesn't feel as nice, and there's some clicking, and you know, I'm not in love with the quality of it, but I really, it's exactly what I wanted it to do, an analog instrument that's about this size. So can't complain. So I was using the zones of the Yamaha Montage to play the Behringer Model D. That was something I never did before on the Yamaha Montage. Kind of neat that you can kind of set it up that way. I'm using a Fender Rhodes. The Montage has so many great Fender Rhodes, you know, in them, and you can get third-party sounds as well that are wonderful. But they're very similar to what I've talked about before. What else? Over here I have a CS80 flute. Now I had a CS80 flute for Rachel's song, which sounds like this. Kind of a noble, simple, has some LFO in it. The CS80 flute that we hear in Tears and Rain is quite different, which is, it's interesting, isn't it, that Vangelis had this great sounding CS80 flute, but he was changing it for even recordings that were recorded rather close together. So over here, so the filter is a little more closed and a little quiet, and then I open up the filter and add more vibrato with the Aftertouch, and it makes it very nice and expressive. And of course you could do pretty much the same thing here, but I just wanted to show you how different they are. What else? So let's talk about the Blade Runner brass patch a bit. So when I first bought this, again, I was struggling with this, trying to get this to sound right. And for example, there's a preset in here called Blade Titles, and I don't want to be negative, but like I was all excited to play this, and it sounds like this. I don't know about you, but to me that doesn't sound very much like the, you know, like the CS80. I had a whole bunch of these, and I kept tinkering, and then I got a Cherry Audio GX80, which many of you probably have. It's a rather inexpensive VST. It's the first virtual synthesizer that I've ever purchased. I was so excited about, especially the GX1 sounds. As you know, I just love the GX1. To me, it doesn't sound like a GX1, to be honest, but it does sound like a CS80 in a lot of ways. It's pretty good. I think, let me see if I can pull that up. So the way that would sound on the closest sound on Cherry Audio's GX80 is Mr. V's lead. So to me, that sounds a whole lot better. It still didn't sound quite right to me. I was playing around, and things really got better when I put the wooden sides on the Hydrosynth. That's when it got warm. No, I started to. I tried everything else, and I'd heard this rumor that the Blade Runner brass sound was essentially a combination of brass 1 and brass 2, the presets on the CS80. So on a CS80, you probably know this, but there's 2 complete synthesizers in a Yamaha CS80, 2 complete single oscillator synthesizers. So you have the top synthesizer, the second one, and the top one has a preset called brass 1, and to me it's not a great brass sound, honestly, especially compared to like a GX1. And then the brass 2 is on the lower, and so I took those sounds from Cherry Audio's synthesizer, and I did my best to recreate them in the Hydrosynth. So I put brass 1 in the top layer here, and I put brass 2 in the lower layer, blended them together, and it started to sound pretty good. And then I started to play with the attack and the release and change the envelopes quite a bit, played with the Aftertouch a lot, and yeah, eventually got something that I was pretty happy with. So probably shouldn't play that yet because I'm still tinkering with it, but yeah, it sounds pretty nice. And then the version from Tears and Rain is a little bit less open filter, a little darker, without the vibrato. So if I just hit the key and hold the sustain pedal, it sounds like this. And the brighter one, if I just hit a note. So again, still playing with that, but starting to be pretty happy with it. And I thought I'd share some of that with you. Oh, another little tip on that was, if you think about the attack envelope, the envelope generator, from the attack to the highest point, it's a straight line on a lot of synthesizers. The default on here is a logarithmic curve, so it's what you might think of as a convex curve. And I found that you can alter that on here, and I made it a exponential curve, so more of what we might call a concave curve. And with that concave curve, I felt like that gave it a little bit closer to the sound. Again, a lot of tinkering, but starting to be pretty happy with it, and hopefully you like it as well. Hopefully you found it a little bit interesting and helpful. If you did, please like, subscribe, check out my other videos, give them thumbs up if you like them, and thanks for your support.